"Get out! We don't serve people like you here." The entire restaurant went silent. A man in a faded hoodie stood near the door, frozen. Heads turned, forks stopped halfway to mouths, a glass slipped and shattered on the floor. "I just asked for a table," the man said quietly. But the waiter laughed. "Try a shelter. This place is expensive." Some people looked away, others stared. No one moved. The man looked down at his worn shoes. He didn't look rich. He didn't look important, just tired and hungry. "Please," he said softly, "I can pay." The waiter grabbed his arm. "I said leave." That's when the man slowly removed his cap. A woman gasped. A teenager whispered, "Wait, that's Big Shaq." Phones came out. Hearts started racing. The waiter's face lost all color. "What?" The man looked around the restaurant, at the people, the lights, the place filled with warmth. "I built this restaurant," he said quietly. Silence. The same place that just treated him like he didn't belong was his. And he didn't come in wearing a suit. He didn't come with security. He came looking like someone the world ignores every day. What happened next didn't just change one waiter's life, it made an entire restaurant cry. It exposed a truth we don't like to admit, and it proved one powerful thing. The person you look down on today might be the reason you're standing tomorrow. Stay with me, because this moment, it gets emotional. It gets real, and the ending will hit your heart hard. Before we start, remember this. No matter how bad a moment looks, no matter how far someone has fallen, there is still hope, still change, still kindness left in this world. This is still time left, where stories don't just entertain, they remind us how to be human. Get out if you can't afford to eat here. The shout hit the restaurant like a slap. Conversations died instantly. A spoon slipped from someone's hand and clattered against a plate. Every head turned toward the entrance. Big Shaq stood just inside the door, one hand still holding it open. Cold evening air drifted in behind him. He wore a faded gray hoodie, slightly wrinkled jeans, and old sneakers with worn soles. Nothing about him looked rich or famous. He looked like a tired man who had walked a long way. "I just asked for a table," he said calmly. The waiter, Derek, stood in front of him with his arms crossed tightly. His jaw was stiff, his eyebrows pulled down. "And I told you," he snapped, "this is a fine dining restaurant." Big Shaq glanced around. Soft golden lights hung from the ceiling. Quiet music played in the background. Couples sat close together. Families shared food. Glasses sparkled. It was warm, peaceful. "I know what kind of place this is," Shaq said. Derek gave a short laugh. "Doesn't look like it," he replied. A man at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably. A woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "This feels wrong." "I have money," Shaq said simply, reaching into his pocket. Derek didn't even look. "It's not just about money, it's about standards. We can't let just anyone walk in." Shaq's hand slowly came out of his pocket and dropped to his side. "Just anyone?" he repeated. Derek shrugged. "You know what I mean." Little boy at a table nearby stared at Shaq wide-eyed, sensing the tension. His mother gently pulled him closer. Shaq took a slow breath. "I've had a long day," he said. "I'm hungry. I'm not causing trouble." "You are the trouble," Derek shot back. The words hung in the air like smoke. Shaq looked down on his shoes. One lace was slightly torn. He nudged it against the floor, then looked back up. "I didn't know clothes decided who deserves food," he said quietly. Derek stepped closer. "Listen, man, people come here to feel comfortable. You're making guests nervous." A glass of water trembled in a woman's hand. "Am I shouting?" Shaq asked. "No." "Am I bothering anyone?" Derek hesitated. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Shaq asked, gentle but piercing. Derek's face reddened. "The point is, this place has a reputation." Shaq's eyes slowly moved across the restaurant again. He looked at the families, the staff, the walls decorated with smiling photos of customers from past events. "I helped build that reputation," he murmured under his breath. "What?" Derek asked. "Nothing," Shaq replied, swallowing emotion. Lisa, the manager, peeked from behind the counter, sensing something wrong. She started walking over quickly. "Derek, what's happening?" she asked, panically. "He refuses to leave," Derek said quickly, defensively. Shaq looked at Lisa. His eyes were tired but kind. "I just wanted dinner," he said softly. Lisa looked between them, unsure. Derek lowered his voice but kept his anger. "Look at him. This isn't a shelter." Shaq flinched slightly, like the words had physically hit him. "I've eaten in worse places," he said quietly, "and I've been treated better." A man near the window shook his head. Lisa stepped closer to Shaq. "Sir, maybe we can find another place for you," she said gently. Shaq nodded slowly, but sadness filled his face. "I thought this was the place," he said, low voice. "Sir, please," Derek insisted, motioning to the door again. Shaq took off his cap and ran his hand over his head, as if trying to stay calm. "I always wondered," he said quietly, "how people are treated when they look like they have nothing." Derek sighed loudly. "I don't have time for this." Shaq looked at him for a long moment, not angry, not loud, just deeply disappointed. "You didn't even ask my name," he said. "Doesn't matter," Derek replied. Shaq gave a small nod, as if something inside him had just settled. Behind him, someone started recording on their phone. A little boy whispered, "Mom, why is he being mean?" His mother had no answer. "Okay," Shaq said quietly, putting his cap back on slowly. He took one step toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned back, eyes glistening under the lights. "I built this place so no one would feel small," he said softly, almost to himself. "What did you say?" Lisa asked, confused. Shaq looked up at her, and for the first time there was a quiet power in his face that made the room hold its breath. "Oh my gosh, that's Big Shaq," a teenage boy whispered from the corner table. His friend's eyes nearly popped out. "No way! It is him!" Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people leaned, stretched, and stared. The quiet restaurant turned into a room full of buzzing whispers. Derek frowned, confused. "Why is everyone staring?" he asked. Big Shaq slowly removed his cap, holding it in his hands. The light above reflected on his face. Now everyone could see him clearly. Lisa's mouth fell open. Her hand flew to her chest. "Mr. Shaq?" she said, her voice barely coming out. Derek looked between them. "You know him?" he asked, forcing a laugh. Lisa didn't blink. "He owns this restaurant," she said quietly. The words dropped like a bomb. A woman gasped loudly. Someone covered their mouth. A fork slipped from a plate again. Derek stepped back, as if the floor had shifted. "That's not possible," he stuttered. Big Shaq didn't smile. He didn't look proud. He looked hurt. "I bought this place 3 years ago," he said calmly. "I wanted to create a space where people felt safe, where no one would be judged by what they wear." Derek's face turned pale. Sweat formed near his hairline. "I didn't know," he whispered. Shaq looked directly at him. "You didn't ask," he replied. The restaurant was completely silent now. Lisa rushed forward. "Sir, I am so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "We had no idea." Shaq gently raised his hand. "Please," he said. Don't apologize for him. Derek swallowed hard. I was just protecting the restaurant, he said weakly. From what? Shaq asked, soft but piercing. Derek couldn't answer. From a man who looked tired? From someone wearing old shoes? A man at a nearby table lowered his head in shame. I came here tonight without security. No fancy car, no designer clothes. Just me. Lisa looked afraid. See what? She asked. How people treat strangers. Derek's hands began to tremble. A young waitress in the back wiped her eyes. The little girl from earlier tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, is he famous?" she asked. Her mother nodded slowly. Shaq noticed the girl looking at him. He gave her a soft smile. She smiled back shyly. Derek suddenly stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he blurted out. Shaq looked at him for a long moment. "What mistake?" Shaq asked calmly. "I judged you," Derek admitted, his voice cracking. I thought you didn't belong." "And now?" Shaq asked. "Now I feel stupid," Derek said. Shaq shook his head slowly. "This isn't about feeling stupid," he said. "It's about understanding why you thought someone like me didn't belong." Derek looked down at the floor. "I grew up poor," he said quietly. "I worked hard to get here. I guess I started thinking poor meant lazy." A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Shaq's eyes softened, but sadness remained. "I grew up with nothing, too," he said softly. "There were nights my family didn't eat." Derek looked up, surprised. "But when someone treated me like I was worthless, that hurt more than hunger." Lisa wiped tears from her cheek. The little girl walked away from her table and approached Shaq slowly. She held out a small folded napkin. "For you," she said. Shaq knelt down. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm. She hugged him tightly. The entire room watched, many with wet eyes. Derek covered his face with his hands. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice breaking. Shaq stood back up slowly. "Sorry is the beginning, but change is the proof." No one spoke. Even the music in the background felt distant. Shaq looked around the restaurant, at the people, the tables, the staff. "This place was never meant to make anyone feel small," he said firmly. Lisa nodded quickly. "You're right," she whispered. Shaq looked back at Derek. "The question is," he said gently, "what are you going to do now?" Derek slowly lowered his hands. Tears streaked his face. "I want to learn," he said. Shaq studied him, searching his face for truth. Around them, the restaurant felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The restaurant felt heavy, like the air itself was carrying emotion. No one ate, no one talked. Every eye stayed on Big Shaq and Derek in the center of the room. Shaq took a slow breath and looked around at the faces watching him. Young, old, rich, ordinary. Some eyes were wet, some were wide with shock. "Everyone deserves respect," he said, his voice calm but strong. "Not because of money, not because of fame, but because they are human." A man near the window nodded slowly. A woman wiped her tears. Shaq turned back to Derek. "Look at me," he said gently. Derek lifted his head. His eyes were red. His shoulders shook slightly. "Why did you speak to me like that?" Shaq asked. Not angry, just searching. Derek swallowed. I thought you were nobody," he admitted, ashamed. The words echoed painfully in the quiet room. Shaq nodded slowly. "That's the problem," he said, sad understanding. "Too many people think nobody means not important." Derek's lips trembled. "I grew up with nothing," he said, voice breaking. "We lived in a small apartment. My parents worked all the time. I was embarrassed of where I came from." Shaq listened carefully. When I got this job, Derek continued, I promised myself I'd never go back to that life. I started believing that people who looked poor were a threat, confessing in shame. A few customers lowered their heads. Shaq's face softened deeply. I grew up poor too, Shaq said quietly. I wore the same shoes for years. Kids laughed at me. Derek looked up, surprised again. I slept in a car once, Shaq continued. Painful memory. But you know what hurt most? Not the hunger, not the cold. It was when people looked at me like I didn't matter. The little girl from earlier held her mother's hand tighter. Derek's tears fell freely now. I became the person I hated, he whispered. Regret. Shaq stepped closer and placed a firm but gentle hand on Derek's shoulder. Real strength isn't pushing people down, it's lifting them up. The room was completely silent again. Lisa stepped forward slowly. Sir, what happens now? She asked, nervous. Shaq looked at Derek, then at the staff, then at the customers, thoughtful. Derek is not fired, Shaq said clearly. Gasps filled the room. I'm not? Derek asked fast. No, Shaq replied, because this moment can change you. And when people change, they deserve a chance. Derek nodded over and over. I swear I'll do better, he said, desperate but sincere. You will start customer care training tomorrow, Shaq said, serious. You will learn to see people, not clothes. Yes, sir, Derek said quickly, grateful. Shaq finally allowed a small smile. And tonight, he added, you will serve me dinner, light but meaningful. A soft ripple of relieved laughter moved through the room. Derek wiped his face and nodded. It would be an honor, he said, humbled. Shaq walked toward a table and sat down slowly. The tension in his shoulders finally eased. Relief. Lisa hurried to the kitchen. Best meal we have, she whispered to the chef. The little girl waved at Shaq from across the room. He waved back warmly. Gentle joy. Derek approached the table with a glass of water, his hand still slightly shaking. He placed it carefully in front of Shaq. Here you go, sir. Respectful. Shaq nodded. Thank you, Derek. Kind. Hearing his name said with kindness made Derek blink back fresh tears. Touched. Around them, people slowly returned to their meals, but something had changed. Conversations were softer, kinder. When the food arrived, Lisa said, It's on the house. Grateful. Shaq shook his head. No, he said, principled. I pay like everyone else. He placed his card on the table. Equal. A man nearby whispered to his wife, That's real class. Admiring. Shaq took a bite, then closed his eyes briefly. Content. Derek watched carefully. Is everything okay? He asked, hopeful. Shaq smiled. It's perfect. Warm. Derek let out a breath he had been holding, relieved. Shaq looked around one last time at the people in the restaurant, reflective. Remember this, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, strong. The person you ignore today might be the one who changes your life tomorrow. The words settled deeply in the room. Powerful silence. The little girl clapped softly, innocent joy. Others followed. Gentle applause. Derek stood taller, not with pride, but with understanding. Growth. And that night, in a restaurant built on a dream of kindness, a hard lesson turned into a new beginning. Hopeful ending.